For this story I neither expect nor ask belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, yet mad am I not. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly and without comment a series of household events. From my infancy, I was especially fond of animals and was given by my parents a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time and never was so happy as when feeding and petting them. As I grew into my manhood, I derived from this peculiarity of character one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished and loved a faithful dog, I do not need to explain the nature of my feelings. I married early and was happy to find that my wife's disposition was similar to my own. Observing my liking for domestic pets, she immediately procured those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. The latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and wise to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife made frequent references to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he followed me wherever I went about the house. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more reckless of the feelings of others. My wife and my pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected them, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from mistreating him, although I had no scruple of mistreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came my way. But my disease grew upon me, and at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to feel the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound on my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I took from my pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of his eyes from the socket. When reason returned the next morning, I experienced a sentiment half of horror and half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty, but it was, at best, a feeble feeling. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but as might be expected, fled in terror at my approach. At first, I was grieved by this evident dislike on the part of the creature which had once loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and so, one morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree, hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes, and with the bitterest remorse at my heart, hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt that it had given me no reason of offense, hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin that would so jeopardize my soul as to place it beyond the reach of any mercy. For months I could not rid myself of the specter of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal and began to look about me for another pet of the same species with which to take its place. One night, as I wandered home, my attention was suddenly drawn to a black object in the road. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and resembling him in every respect. Upon my touching him, he purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted to see me. When I prepared to go home, the animal accompanied me, and upon reaching the house, it domesticated itself at once and immediately became a great favorite with my wife. For my part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated. But its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed me. And by slow degrees, these feelings rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. But gradually I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing. What added to my hatred of the beast, no doubt, was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it also had been deprived of one of its eyes. This fact only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed in a high degree that humanity of feeling which once had been my distinguishing trait. With my loathing for this cat, however, its liking for myself seemed to increase. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was withheld from so doing partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I am at a loss how otherwise to define the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me. Neither by day or by night knew I the blessing of rest anymore. During the day, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the night, I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face and its vast weight resting eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of such torments, evil thoughts became my sole intimates. The darkest and the most evil of thoughts. My temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, and I abandoned myself to the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of fury, to which my wife was the most usual and most patient of sufferers. One day, she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of our house. The cat followed me down the steep stairs and nearly tripped me. This exasperated me to madness. Lifting an axe, I aimed a blow at the animal, which, of course, would have proved fatal had it descended. But this blow was stopped by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe into her head. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. It was then that I determined to wall it up in the cellar. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position, and then relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old. With this, I carefully went over the new work. When I had finished, the wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness. for I had firmly resolved to put it to death. However, it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my anger and had fled. It is impossible to describe the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature made in my heart. It did not make its appearance during the night, and I soundly slept. Yes, slept even with the burden of murder on my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor did not come. Once again, I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. As for my wife, a few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of police came, very unexpectedly, into the house and proceeded to make a rigorous investigation of the premises. I felt no embarrassment whatever as I accompanied them in their search. At length they descended into the cellar, and my heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. The police were soon satisfied and prepared to depart. I burned to say if but one word of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. Gentlemen, your suspicions. By the way, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed what I uttered. I may say an excellently constructed house. Here, through a frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I held in my hand, upon my wife. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into the silence, cry at first muffled and broken like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swell howl, a shriek, half of horror and half of triumph. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell upon its head with red extended mouth and solitary eye, and whose voice had now consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the
story to relate to you. Perhaps you will call it an hallucination, my dear Dr. Fraley, not with a term in the town of Meridian. I succeeded in renting a vacant dwelling that had been occupied without an apparent trace. He had built the house himself and lived in it with an entirely, withdrew from society, and became a recluse. During his retirement, he had devoted himself to a single line of study, approval of his professional brethren. Indeed, many even considered him not in hurry. The house was furnished just as he had lived in it. It was rather gloomy, natural disposition. I always had a feeling of impending evil. The doctor's life-size portrait in oil hung in that room and seemed... The man was evidently rather good-looking. He was about 50, with eyes. Something in the picture always drew and held my... rather haunted me. One evening I was passing, visited me, but did not disturb me. I moved the lamp from one side to the other, and as he was near enough, I saw that it was Dr. Mannering himself. He passed me within an arm's length, lifted his right forefinger as if it's a ghost story. If that was so, I should not have related it. Did he say anything today? Announcing the result of a diagnosis, for example. Yes, however, I do it. Doctor, have you anything to say to me? Play it. Play something light and lively. Violin at his neck. The bow upon the strings.
The exact time? Good God, my friend, why do you insist? One would think that... Oh, what does it matter? It is easily bedtime. Isn't that near enough? But here, if you must set your watch, take mine and see for yourself.
With that, he detached his watch, a tremendously heavy, old-fashioned one, from the chain, and handed it to me, and then turned away. Having set my watch by his, I stepped over to where he stood and said, "You must try to forgive me, but I cannot understand your going all to pieces when asked the time of night. Why so strong a reluctance to look your own watch in the face?"
My dear fellow, despite your obvious impudence, I have decided to tell you what you wish to know. Be good enough to give me your attention. This watch has been in my family for 3 generations before it fell to me. Its original owner, for whom it was made, was my great-grandfather, Bramwell Alcott Bartine, a wealthy planter of colonial Virginia, and as staunch a Tory as ever lay awake nights contriving new methods of aiding and abetting good King George in his war with the colonies. One day this worthy gentleman had the deep misfortune to perform for his cause a service of capital importance, which was not recognized as legitimate by the American rebels. It does not matter what it was, but among its minor consequences was my excellent ancestor's arrest one night in his own house by a party of Mr. Washington's troops. He was permitted to say farewell to his weeping family, and then was marched away into the darkness which swallowed him up forever. Not the slenderest clue to his fate was ever found. After the war, the most diligent inquiry and the offer of large rewards failed to turn up any of his captors or any fact concerning his disappearance. He had disappeared, and that was all.
What is your view of the matter, of the justice of it?
My view of it is that it was a characteristically dastardly assassination by that traitor Washington and his ragamuffin rebels.
Was that all?
No. There was something else. A few weeks after my great-grandfather's arrest, his watch was found lying on the porch at the front door of his dwelling. It was wrapped in a sheet of letter paper bearing the name of Rupert Bartine, his only son, my grandfather. I am wearing that watch. I have a singular feeling toward this watch, a kind of affection for it. I like to have it about me, though partly because of its weight and partly for a reason I shall now explain. I seldom carry it. And the reason is this. Every evening when I have it with me, I feel an unaccountable desire to open and consult it, even if I can think of no reason for wishing to know the time. But if I yield to it, the moment my eyes rest upon the dial, I'm filled with a mysterious apprehension, a sense of imminent calamity. And this is the more insupportable the nearer it is to 11 o'clock. By this watch, no matter what the actual hour may be. After the hands have registered 11, the desire to look is gone. I'm entirely indifferent. Then I can consult the thing as often as I like with no more emotion than you feel in looking at your own.
His concluding smile was positively ghastly, and his eyes had resumed something more than their old restlessness. They shifted about the room and had taken on a wild expression, such as is sometimes observed in cases of dementia. Perhaps this was my own imagination, but at any rate, I was now persuaded that my friend was afflicted with a most singular and interesting monomania. I began to regard him as a patient, rich in possibilities of profitable study. I should cure him if I could, but first I should make a little experiment in psychology. The experiment itself might be a step in the cure. I then asked Bartine if he would show me the watch again. He detached it from his waistcoat, chain and all, and passed it to me without a word. The case was of gold, very thick and strong, and singularly engraved. After closely examining the dial and observing that it was nearly 12 o'clock, I opened it at the back and was interested to observe an inner case of ivory, upon which was painted a miniature portrait in that exquisite and delicate manner which was in vogue during the 18th century. How under the sun did you get that done? I thought miniature painting on ivory was a lost art.
Oh, that is not I. It is my excellent great-grandfather, the late Bramwell Alcott Bartine, Esquire of Virginia. He was younger then, about my age, in fact. It is said to resemble me. You think so?
Resemble you? I should say so. Barring that costume, that portrait is you in every feature, line, and expression. Bartine took a book from the table and began reading. Seeing myself unobserved, I took the old-fashioned key that dangled from the chain and quickly turned back the hands of the watch a full hour. Then, closing the case, I handed it to Bartine and saw him replace it on his person. I think you said that after 11, the sight of the dial no longer affects you. As it is now nearly 12, perhaps, if you don't resent my pursuit of proof, you will look at it now. He smiled good-humoredly, pulled out the watch again, and opened it. It is 2 minutes to 11! I beg your pardon. I must have misread your watch in setting my own by it. He shut the case with a sharp snap and put the watch in his pocket. His lower lip quivered, and he seemed unable to close his mouth. His hands also were shaking. He began to sway from side to side as from vertigo, and before I could spring from my chair to support him, his knees gave way and he pitched forward and fell upon his face. I sprang to assist him to rise, but it was too late. John Bartine was dead. I do not know if in the spiritual world a feeling may survive the mind and body that held it, and be felt again by another person ages removed. I only know that the post-mortem examination disclosed nothing. Every organ was normal and sound. But when the body had been prepared for burial, a faint, dark circle was seen to have developed around the neck of John Bartine. Surely, if I were to guess the fate of Bramwell Alcott Bartine, I should guess that he was hanged at 11 o'clock in the evening. John Bartine is buried, and his watch with him. May God rest his soul in paradise, and the soul of his Virginia ancestor, if indeed they are two souls.
Once upon a time, not so long ago, a man and his wife lived in a small house out in the countryside. They had a few chickens who supplied them with eggs and an occasional Sunday dinner, a cow for fresh milk, and a small garden that furnished them with all of the vegetables that they needed. One night, they were sitting by the fire listening to the rain pounding on the roof when suddenly a gust of wind blew open the front door, and there, standing on the doorsill, was a rather large yellow cat. looking very wet and bedraggled. As the man got up to close the door, the cat walked over and stretched out in front of the fire and soon fell asleep. Well, the cat became a member of the household, and it was really a very nice cat. It kept the house and the old barn out in the back reasonably free of mice. It didn't chase birds. The one strange thing about this cat was that it never purred. As a matter of fact, it never made any sound at all. It didn't meow like other cats, but especially it didn't purr. It never purred while it was being petted or after it was fed. It just never purred. The man and his wife remarked about this from time to time, and they boasted to their friends that they owned the only cat in the world that didn't purr. One morning, the man left his house and walked down the road to a neighbor to help him with his haying. After finishing early in the evening, he headed back down the road to his house. As he was passing a small grove of trees, he heard a commotion in the underbrush alongside the road. He stopped, and suddenly, from the brush, there walked a black cat, followed by 8 other black cats, who were carrying a board upon which rested the body of an old gray cat who was obviously dead. As the man gazed in amazement at the sight, the leader of the cats turned to him and said in a very clear voice, "Mister, please tell Aunt Lucy that Morty Pitcher is dead." And with that, the leader of the cats beckoned to his followers, and they continued across the road and into the woods. The man started down the road to his house once more. He really couldn't believe that the cat had spoken to him, and yet he couldn't forget the words that kept echoing in his mind. When he got home, he walked in and sat down in a chair. His wife hurried over and said to him, "John, what has happened? Why are you looking like that?" He looked at her for a moment and then said, "My dear, the strangest thing just happened. A few minutes ago, as I was passing that little patch of woods just up the road, I saw 9 black cats cross the road in front of me. 8 of them were carrying a board, and on that board was an old gray cat. The 9th cat, who seemed to be their leader, called out to me as they passed, 'Mister, please tell Aunt Lucy that Morty Pitcher is dead.'" As the man finished his statement, the yellow cat, who had been sleeping by the fire, jumped up and said in a very clear voice, "She is? Well, then I'd better leave now, or I'll be late for the funeral." And with that, she ran out the door and was never seen again.